Amen. Good evening, friends. Welcome back to the reading of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Let us pray. I know that for myself, I find our reading to be instructive and enlightening and quite useful. And I hope that is the case for you as well. Today we will continue with St. Macarius the Great, and we read 7 chapters last time, so today we will start with chapter 8. Abba Peter said this about holy Macarius. One day he came to the cell of an anchorite who happened to be ill, and he asked him if he would take something to eat, though his cell was stripped bare. When the other replied, "Some sherbet," that courageous man did not hesitate, but went as far as Alexandria to fetch some for the sick man. The astonishing thing is that no one knew about it. So basically, he took such labor upon himself to comfort this ailing monastic. And of course, here it says that the astonishing thing is nobody knew about it, meaning he did not tell anyone. He didn't want any human praise for it. And of course, the journey to Alexandria must have been quite taxing. Chapter 9. He also said this when Abba Macarius received all the brethren in simplicity. Some of them asked him why he mixed with them like this. He replied, "For 12 years I served the Lord so that he might grant me this gift. And do you all advise me to give it up?" So this gift of simplicity, meaning that he treated others as his equals, and he was not at all sort of lofty and exalted above the other brethren. Chapter 10. They said about Abba Macarius that when he visited the brethren, he laid this rule upon himself: "If there is wine, drink some for the brethren's sake, but for each cup of wine spend a day without drinking water." So the brothers would offer him some refreshment, and the old man would accept it joyfully to mortify himself. But when his disciple got to know about it, he said to the brethren, "In the name of God, do not offer him any more, or he will go and kill himself in his cell." When they heard that, the brethren did not offer him wine any more. Now, this is something that is characteristic of true ascetics. They fulfilled the ascetic struggle not only outwardly, but first of all inwardly. And you might say that they kept not only the letter of the law, but even more so the spirit of the law. And of course, the Lord teaches us that when we fast, we should look joyous and not look sad and not let anyone know that we're fasting. And thus, St. Macarius and many other saints would eat things that they would normally not eat, or perhaps drink wine, as in this particular story we're told. But then when they are alone and no one would see their struggle, they would compensate for the relaxation that they allowed themselves in the community, sort of, in the open fellowship, with other brethren. And thus we see that the disciple who loved St. Macarius and cared for him very much warned the brethren not to give him wine, because if he were to drink a cup of wine, he would spend a day without water, which means if they poured him 3 cups of wine, then that means he would not have water for 3 days. And that is why the disciple begged the other monks to spare him and not to subject him to such strict rule. Chapter 11. When Abba Macarius was returning from the marsh to his cell one day, carrying some palm leaves, he met the devil on the road with a scythe. The latter struck at him as much as he pleased, but in vain, and he said to him, "What is your power, Macarius, that makes me powerless against you? All that you do, I do too. You fast, so do I. You keep vigil, and I do not sleep at all. In one thing only do you beat me." Abba Macarius asked what that was. He said, "Your humility. Because of that, I can do nothing against you." And we see that the ascetic struggle is meant to help us acquire humility. Professor Osipov, in his lectures, he actually says, if you want to acquire humility, try to live an ascetic life. Try to live according to the gospel. Try fulfilling the commandments. And when you fail miserably, you will quickly gain humility. You will see your weakness and recognize it and humble yourself before God. Unfortunately, if we do not follow the ascetic struggle all the way through to its intended goal, then by merely fasting a little bit and maybe reading a few extra prayers, we can become quite proud and conceited. And in fact, really, we can even fall into phantasm, into beguilement, what the Russian word would be prelist, and I believe in Greek it would be plani. So we must be careful whenever we undertake an ascetic feat, whenever we do something seemingly for our salvation and for God, we must consider the fact that the ultimate goal should be the acquisition of humility. King David says it best in the 50th Psalm, if thou hadst desired sacrifice, I would have given it. With whole burnt offerings thou shalt not be pleased. A sacrifice unto God is a broken spirit, a heart that is broken and humbled God will not despise. And so, through all of his struggles, this is what St. Macarius acquired. And we must also emulate the saints in that. And when we fast a little, read a little, pray a little, we shouldn't think that we have become great already, but we should really consider the ultimate goal, and that is humility, which makes us unassailable to the enemy. And of course, humility opens to us the doors of paradise. Chapter 12. Some fathers questioned Abba Macarius the Egyptian. Why is it that whether you eat or whether you fast, your body is always emaciated? The old man said to them, the little bit of wood that is used to poke the vine branches when they are burning ends by being entirely burnt up by the fire. So let me read this again. The little bit of wood that is used to poke the vine branches when they are burning ends by being entirely burnt by the fire. In the same way, man purifies his soul in the fear of God, and the fear of God burns up his body. So what he's saying is, if you use a stick to poke the fire, the stick that you're using eventually gets burned all the way, because the tip of it ggets burned, and as you keep using it, it sort of slowly burns all the way up. In the same way, he was saying that the fear of God burns him as well. Now, of course, I would like to welcome Dimitri, and it's always good to have everyone with us today and every time we read. Chapter 13. One day Abba Macarius went up from Setis to Ternouthis and went into the temple to sleep. Now there were some old coffins of the pagans there. Taking one, he put it under his head as a pillow. The devils, seeing his audacity, were filled with jealousy, and to make him afraid they called out, as though addressing a woman, "So and so, come to bathe with us." Another devil replied from beneath him, as though among the dead, "I have a stranger on top of me, and I cannot come." But the old man was not afraid. On the contrary, he knocked on the coffin with assurance, saying, "Awake and go into the darkness if you can." Hearing this, the devils began to cry out with all their might, "You have overcome us." Filled with confusion, they fled. Now, what this is all about, basically, is the fact that whenever the ascetic is making progress and is not committing, outright sins in his life, stays pure, keep his thoughts pure, prays, reads, works, then there's little where the enemy can sort of beguile the ascetic or force him to do his bidding, to do his will. And so frightening the ascetics was a sort of a widespread of the demons fighting against them in the desert and in the various places where they lived. And so they would present them with visions or with various other assaults to scare them away. And of course, for the ascetic, to become afraid and to run away would basically be to give in to the demons. And that is why St. Macarius here, seemingly, sort of almost inhumanly brave, resting his head on a coffin, on a pagan coffin, responds in the way that he does. If you can, get up and go into the darkness, because he's well aware of who it is that is talking, that it's not the dead body inside the coffin, but it's the evil spirits. And so there are many, 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 many other accounts in the lives of the Optina elders. We're told of one account where one of the elders, and I can't remember exactly his name, one of the Optina elders, whose obedience was to keep watch of the back gate of the monastery, sort of at the back entry into the monastery, along the monastery wall. His cell was right next to the gate, and one night, in the middle of the night, he heard the neighing of horses. He heard their hooves stomping the ground. He heard the sort of the banging and clashing of the, Cossack swords. And somebody was banging into the back gate and saying, "Open up, open up." And he said, "Pray." And they said, "Open up or we'll kill you. We're not going to pray." And they were laughing and mocking him. And of course, this Optina elder, who's a saint, he basically said, "No, I will not open." So he didn't open despite the threats to burn down the gates, to kill him and whatnot and so on. He went into his room and he prayed. And when he got up in the morning, because this was happening in the middle of the night, and he looked out sort of into the space where these people were, everything was covered with fresh snow, and there were no steps. There were no horse steps. There were no human steps. No tracks whatsoever outside. And so he knew that it was a demonic apparition that was really frightening him and trying to gain access to the monastery. There is a similar story of the monastics back in the 70s and 80s in the Caucasus Mountains of the Soviet Union. They were living in hiding from the communist authorities, trying to keep the faith, trying to keep up the ascetic practices. And one of them found a tree that had a hollow inside, which was, I suppose, very convenient for him. It was a very large old tree, and that hollow space was like a small room, essentially. So he had made his abode in this tree. He was in this room. And also, once in the middle of the night, he heard commotion. He heard loud noises. He looked out. He saw what seemed like a funeral procession, people walking with torches, carrying a dead body. And some of them started screaming, "Hey, hey, let's go. Let's get that monk. Let's kill him." So he, sort of went back into the tree and prayed the whole night. In the morning, when he climbed out of the tree and looked at the ground near this tree, apparently there was a mountain river nearby, and it was a sandy space. There were no footmarks. There were no footprints. And so he knew also that these were the demons in the middle of the night, scaring him, trying to drive him away. And so this happening to St. Macarius is nothing unknown to the true ascetics and true monastics who lived especially alone in the desert. That would have been something that they were well acquainted with. Chapter 14. It was said of Abba Macarius the Egyptian that one day when he was going up from Cetis with a load of baskets, he sat down, overcome with weariness, and began to say to himself, "My God, you know very well that I cannot go any further." And immediately he found himself at the river. So, he wasn't calling himself God, obviously. Basically, say to himself, meaning that there was nobody else out there. And it would seem that he was talking to himself, but it's obvious he was actually praying and saying, "Lord, you know I can't go any further. I'm too exhausted." And he was transported in space. Chapter 15. A man of Egypt had a paralytic son. He brought him to the cell of Abba Macarius and put him down at the door weeping, and went a good distance away. The old man stooped down and saw the child and said to him, "Who brought you here?" He replied, "My father threw me down here and went away." Then the old man said to him, "Get up and go back to him." The child was cured on the spot. He got up and rejoined his father, and they returned to their own home. Now, the context of something like this happening is following. If the father came and told St. Macarius that his son was paralytic, there was a likelihood that St. Macarius would simply say, "I'm really sorry, this is above my strength," and would refuse to heal the boy. He would refuse to, work a miracle so as not to be glorified, so as not to be seen as a wonder worker. And that is why the father did what he did. He left the child and walked away. This also is not a singular occurrence. I'm not sure if we read this in this book, or we might read this because we're roughly halfway through. There's another story which has a very similar context. The parents bring a possessed boy to the monastery for the elder to drive out the demon, and the monks tell them, they say, if the elder knows what you're asking, he will never do it, because he does not want to be recognized as the one who drives out demons. And the parents, lamented and said to the monks, "Well, then tell us what to do. How can we, help our son? We need the elder to cast out this demon." And so the monastics told them, they said, "Well, we have an idea. Put the young boy in the chair where the elder always sits in church." Now, in the sort of Middle Eastern churches in Greece and in the Holy Land, along the wall, they would have these sort of stalls with double sets of armrests. The chair in those can easily fold up so that you could stand up at full height and still rest your elbows on the armrests, because the services were so long that you sometimes you really needed that sort of external support. And for those time of the service where actual sitting was allowed, you could then fold down the seat and sit down in it. So what the monks told the parents was, fold the seat, put the boy there, the possessed boy, and see what happens. And so the elder comes, he sees that the boy is occupying his spot, and he says, "Go away from here, get out." And the demon left instantly. And the boy was healed and, sort of handed back to his parents. So seeing that this is not a singular occurrence, people must have learned already, that the monks were so humble. If you asked them something like this, to work a miracle like this directly, they never would. And so they would essentially trick the saints into working these miracles. Chapter 16. Abba Macarius the Great said to the brothers at Setis, when he dismissed the assembly, "Flee, my brothers." One of the elders asked him, Where could we flee to beyond this desert?" He put his finger on his lips and said, "Flee that." And he went to his cell, shut the door, and sat down. So basically, what he's saying is, flee idle talk, flee idle communication. You're in the desert already, yes, but because you're in a monastery together, not that you have to flee from one another, but flee familiarity, flee judgment, flee the bearing of false witness, and all the various sins that you can commit with your mouth. If you go to your cell and you stay by yourself and you pray and you read and you do your obedience, then you're fine. The moment that you enter fellowship with other men, well, then, you can end up sinning by saying something that you shouldn't. Chapter 17. The same Abba Macarius said, "If you reprove someone, you yourself get carried away by anger, and you are satisfying your own passion. Do not lose yourself, therefore, in order to save another." And so what he's saying basically is, if instructing someone else, you're feeding your own passion, well, while you're trying to help that person, you are not helping yourself. And so you must really be careful, both to correct your brother and not to give in to sin on your own. And of course, we see St. Macarius himself has truly mastered the art of rebuking a brother without offending him, without confusing him, without tempting him. And we have much to learn in that department, because oftentimes, even when we are correct, we observe something, the very demeanor with which we say it, sometimes the poorly chosen time on our part actually causes more damage and more hurt, and in some cases definitely feeds into our passions. So that way, while we're trying to save someone else, we're hurting ourselves. Very true. Chapter 18. The same Abba Macarius, while he was in Egypt, discovered a man who owned a beast of burden engaged in plundering Macarius' goods. So he came up to the thief as if he were a stranger, and he helped him to load the animal. He saw him off in great peace of soul, saying, "We have brought nothing into this world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And so you might say that in this, St. Macarius has exhibited true monasticism and the renunciation of this world and the possessions of this world. When he found somebody stealing from his cell, taking away his possessions, not only did he not stop him, he actually helped him. That means he was that willing, he was that quick to sort of bid farewell to his earthly possessions. And in a sense, since he quotes the great Job, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord," he sort of exhibits the very virtue of the righteous, much-suffering Job. Chapter 19. Abba Macarius was asked, "How should one pray?" The old man said, "There's no need at all to make long discourses. It is enough to stretch out one hand and say, 'Lord, as you will and as you know, have mercy.' And if the conflict grows fierce, say, 'Lord, help.' He knows very well what we need, and he shows us his mercy." The conflict, that I'm sure that what St. Macarius means by the conflict is the fact that the temptation, if you are truly struggling, if you're having a difficult time controlling your thoughts and directing them to prayer to God, all you have to say is just say, "Lord, help," or "Lord, have mercy." You don't have to say lengthy prayers. Lengthy prayers sometimes get the mind tangled and it doesn't help. But he basically says, if all you do is you stretch out your hands to God and say, "Lord, as you know, as you will, and as you know, have mercy," well, you know God will have mercy, because he does not refuse the prayer which is according to his will. And saying, "As you will and as you know, have mercy," is definitely according to God's will. So for certain, that's a 100% guaranteed proof positive prayer that will be answered. Chapter 20. Abba Macarius said, If slander has become to you the same as praise, poverty as riches, deprivation as abundance, you will not die. Indeed, it is impossible for anyone who firmly believes, who labors with devotion, to fall into the impurity of the passions and be led astray by the demons. So what he means here certainly is that you will not die refers to spiritually, not physically, obviously. St. Macarius knows very well that we are all temporary and that everyone has to die. But if you become indifferent to slander and praise, poverty and riches, deprivation and abundance, you become already in this body and in this life a citizen of heaven. Essentially, it's almost like, I imagine that sometimes people, when they immigrate, and let's say the country that they're in, life is difficult, things are challenging, and so on and so forth, and they apply for immigration. Once they get their immigration approved, even though they're still in the old country, they feel a tremendous amount of relief and joy and happiness, because they know already, well, it's just a matter of time for us to go to the other place. So becoming indifferent to slander and praise, poverty and riches, deprivation and abundance, essentially once you achieve those, it's almost like you get your heavenly citizenship ahead of your death. and you are somewhat assured. And I'm not trying to say that, oh, you could be saved here ahead of your time. Obviously, even St. Macarius, and I'm not sure if this will be spoken of in this book, but we're told that when he died, as the angels were carrying his soul to heaven, the demons were saying, "You've conquered us." And he said, "No, not yet." And then again they came up, approached and said, "You've conquered us, Macarius." And he said, "Not yet." And I think they did it a third time. And after the third time, he was brought before Christ. And of course, the Lord said to him, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into the rest of thy Lord." And only when St. Macarius heard these words, "Enter into the rest of thy Lord," only then did he turn around and say to the demons, "Not now, not I, but Christ my Lord has truly conquered you on my behalf," and sort of, continued on his way into heaven. So that is what he's talking about here. Chapter 21. It was said that two brothers at Cetis had fallen into sin, and that Abba Macarius of Alexandria had excommunicated them. Some brethren came and told Abba Macarius the Great of Egypt about it. He said, "It is not the brothers who were excommunicated, it is Macarius, for he loved him." Hearing that he had been excommunicated by the elder, Abba Macarius fled to the marsh. Then Abba Macarius the Great went out and found him eaten up by mosquitoes. He said to him, "So you have excommunicated some brothers, and yet they live apart in the village. I myself have excommunicated you, and like a pretty young girl to the utmost privacy of her chamber, you have fled here. I have summoned the two brothers, and have learned from them what happened, and I have told them nothing. Nothing has happened. Examine yourself then, my brother, and see if you have not been the sport of the demons. For you have lacked perception in this matter, but repent of your fault." Then the other asked him, "Please give me a penance." Faced with this humility, the old man said, "Go fast for 3 weeks, eating only once a week," for it was his usual custom to fast for the whole week. So now, it is apparent that when St. Macarius of Egypt said that about St. Macarius of Alexandria, he had already perceived that the brothers didn't commit the sin that it was thought that they'd committed. And thus, he said, "You lacked perception in the matter." And then, gave penance to the other one for excommunicating somebody unworthily. I'm sure that's pretty much self-explanatory. Chapter 22. Abba Moses said to Abba Macarius at Cetis, "I should like to live in quiet prayer, and the brethren do not let me." Abba Macarius said to him, "I see that you are a sensitive man and incapable of sending a brother away. Well, if you want to live in peace, go to the interior desert, to Petra, and there you will find peace." And so he found peace. Now, this is quite interesting. So Abba Moses says, "I should like to live in quiet prayer, and the brethren do not let me." And it is the response of Abba Macarius that sheds more light on it, because he's saying, "I see that you are a sensitive man and incapable of sending a brother away." So basically, what Abba Moses is saying is, I would like to live in solitude and pray quietly. But the brothers come and visit me on a regular basis, and they bother me. They don't let me do what I need to do. And St. Macarius says, "Yeah, I see you're sensitive, and you can't tell them to go away." Because St. Arsenius the Great, as we read, had no problem treating people so, and I think Abba Theodore also, it says, right, sort of was as hard as steel when visitors came to see him, so that they quickly, walked away. And I believe that Moses the Egyptian, in fact, sort of was much nicer and very friendly and kind, and sort of received people, with hospitality. So they tended to go to him to be comforted. But St. Arsenius, St. Theodore, and in this case, St. Moses himself, seeking advice from St. Macarius, were not trying to be cold, hard, and hard-hearted. They were trying to focus on prayer. And of course, having to offer hospitality really detracts you from that. interrupts one's life of prayer and life of solitude. And that is why St. Macarius told him, go into the inner desert, go further away, so to where only a few people live, so that the brothers won't come and trouble you. And that is where Abba Moses found peace, because then the brothers physically had too far to go to visit him. Chapter 23. And well, before I read on, I suppose I should say, well, how does that apply to us? Sometimes we have things to do, and whether it be pray, read, or even worldly things that sort of rightly need our attention, if it's housework, or just work, where we're earning our living, if it's studying, if it's carrying out of any other task that we must be able to do in peace, we get not the brothers interrupting us, but in fact we live in an age where there's so many distractions stemming from the technology that is here to improve our lives. And yet often it could be a double-edged sword that can make us quite miserable, because we get interrupted by phone calls, by texts, by notifications from the various, social networks or other apps that we're using. And it makes us less productive overall when we allow these to rule our lives. And so in that sense, it is important for us to go into the inner desert. Sometimes we must turn do not disturb on our phones, on our computers, in order to get our other tasks accomplished. Sometimes we just need to altogether put the gadget away, put it aside, in order to be able to focus on the person with whom we are communicating at the time, and in order to be kind and loving and give the attention that the person requires. And so, in that sense, this advice that Abba Macarius gives to Abba Moses is extremely relevant to us as well. We might not see it right away when we read it, because we think, oh, well, that's very nice. He just got away from the monks who were coming in and troubling him. But we have people coming in into our minds, into our hearts, into our souls continuously. Headlines popping. Oh, this is happening. Take a look, take a read. Messages. And quite frankly, I think that there's a lot of unsolicited communication that takes place that we must also learn to filter out. In some cases, maybe even having to block somebody entirely, because that communication is only tempting and not helping us on our way, on our path to salvation. So definitely a short chapter, but very informative, and I think very, very, very relevant and important in our day and age. Chapter 23. A brother came to see Abba Macarius the Egyptian and said to him, Abba, give me a word that I may be saved. So the elders said, go to the cemetery and abuse the dead. The brother went there, abused them, and threw stones at them. Then he returned and told the elder about it. The latter said to him, didn't they say anything to you? He replied, no. The elder said, go back tomorrow and praise them. So the brother went away and praised them, calling them apostles, saints, and righteous men. He returned to the elder and said to him, I have complimented them. And the elder said to him, did they answer? Did they not answer you? The brother said, no. The elder said to him, you know how you insulted them, and they did not reply, and how you praised them, and they did not speak. So you too, if you wish to be saved, must do the same and become a dead man. Like the dead, take no account of either scorn of men or their praises, and you can be saved. Well, becoming dead to other people is very important, because in a good way, in the right way, if we were to understand this the right way. Because often when we seek praise or approval from other men, we become dependent. It can become a passion almost. Some people, are so vainglorious that a mere word of criticism causes them tremendous damage, and of course praise gives them a very big high. And so these people live on an emotional roller coaster from day to day, and they don't realize that they depend on the to others and their needs, a whole offering to God. Because if any portions of our life are taken up by, this unhealthy dependence on the approval and praise of other people, well then, we can't really offer those parts to God wholly. Now, by no means am I saying that we need to be antisocial and disregard the healthy and appropriate expectations of society. That would not be what we are called on by God. We are living in a society, and St. Paul teaches us to live in peace with those not only within the church, but also with those who are outside, because this is the way that we bear good witness to our faith. Meanwhile, I would say for the interior life, for the spiritual life, we must make sure that our sense of worth, our sense of self-esteem is rooted in a pure conscience, that our conscience is pure before God rather than in the praise of other men. Because if we depend on the praise of other men, we're really not that different from from a given drug addict who's depending, on the high that he gets from the substance he's abusing. Well, in this case, we're abusing communication for the sake of getting praise and making ourselves feel better about ourselves. But in reality, just as drugs eventually lose potency, and so, people have to increase the dosage, and then they eventually overdose, praise will do the same to us as well. And so in that sense, we must be extremely cautious and careful. Now, told that we have a bit of an issue with the connection, so I'm going to test it on another device and see if our internet is working okay. Yes, here at my house it's working quite well, so I'm not sure whether that's the problem with YouTube or the connection on the other end. Please pray for me, and God willing, we will continue next week. I don't believe we have evening services next week. That would interfere with our reading, and so, God willing, we should be able to read on Wednesday night as we did today. So within a week, God willing, yes, within a week, we will read hopefully next Wednesday. Please pray for me. God bless all of you, and God willing, we will continue next week with St. Macarius the Great. God bless.